with my home birth, she came to my home. Our visits were an hour at least. If I had more questions or needed to talk, more about things, then she was available to do that. I still got all of, the safety things. Like she would still test my urine and my blood pressure and take all of my vitals. But she would also ask me things that you're not going to get asked with traditional OBs or traditional midwives. How is your diet? What does your diet look like? Do this nutrition log for me for a week so I can see maybe, where we can improve. How are you sleeping? Are you getting any exercise? These things that maybe the modern Western model don't really see as valuable.
From the Weston A. Price Foundation, welcome to the Wise Traditions podcast for wise traditions in food, farming, and the healing arts. We are your source for scientific knowledge and traditional wisdom to help you achieve optimal health.
Hey, Hilda here. Women once gave birth at home with the assistance of family members and/or midwives. The shift to hospital births started in the 20th century. Now it seems there is a shift back to home birth. What are the pros and cons of home birth? And will you be among those opting for it? This is episode 366, and our guests today are registered nurse Elizabeth Parsons and her husband Noah. Elizabeth started out selling DIY organic elderberry kits nationwide, and now she has a large following in the health and wellness space online. She is passionate about empowering individuals to take charge of their health, educating them about the pursuit of natural alternatives for healing. Elizabeth worked as a pediatric nurse for 9 years, and she and Noah have 5 children. Some were born at the hospital and some at home. And together, Noah and Elizabeth explain what to consider when making this important birthing decision, home or the hospital. They discuss the need to know your rights and birthing options wherever you decide to give birth. They also delve into the difference between midwifery and OB/GYN care throughout pregnancy and after delivery. Noah and Elizabeth share their own perspective on the birth process and their most recent and surprising home birth experience. Before we dive into the conversation, do you have picky eaters, indulgent grandparents, kids with particular cravings or affinities? How are we moms supposed to handle it all? The Modern Ancestral Mamas podcast is for you. It's a show for mamas created by mamas. The hosts discuss ancestral food, cooking, how to feed your family well, and practical, holistic living for the everyday modern mom. The show is hosted by 2 Weston A. Price Foundation chapter leaders, Corey Dunn and Christine Muldoon, and they are on a mission to nourish their families holistically while keeping it real in today's crazy world. And they show us how to do it too. They break down everything from where to source nutrient-dense food to how to start cooking ancestrally. They offer postpartum support and so much more. You can find Modern Ancestral Mamas on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. An Ultimate Dog Chirp Superfood Topper. It is specially formulated to address stubborn dog allergies by improving your dog's gut health. Chirp is made with only the best ingredients: human-grade organic cricket protein, organic reishi mushrooms, and organic kelp. Here's what some of Chirp's ingredients do. The U.S.-grown organic reishi mushroom blend in Chirp delivers 120 milligrams of beta-glucans per scoop, and it boosts immunity while supporting a healthy inflammatory response. Soil-based organism probiotics, Saccharomyces boulardii and Bacillus coagulans, help balance the dog's intestinal flora and reduce inflammation while enhancing immune function. Powerful fungal-based enzymes improve the dog's overall digestion and support regularity. When combined with the other stuff, organic kelp and low-carb organic cricket protein, Chirp provides your dog with vitamins A, B, E, D, K, calcium, potassium, iron, and zinc, all necessary for your dog's overall good health. Organic kelp improves dry, itchy skin while reducing the itching and irritation due to skin allergies. Organic cricket protein is an excellent source of antioxidants, protecting your dog's cells against the free radicals that cause inflammation and cellular damage. All told, what I love about Chirp, besides the fact that it helps my dog stop licking her paws incessantly, is that it contains 0 fillers and no preservatives, only the ingredients that benefit your dog's health and wellness. My lab loves it, but of course she does because she's a lab. But you can still check it out and see what it does for your dog. Visit ultimatedog.com/chirp and use the coupon WISE for 15% off your next order. That's ultimatedog.com/chirp and the coupon WISE. Your fur baby will thank you. This is Holistic Hilda, and you're listening to Wise Traditions. Noah and Elizabeth, welcome to Wise Traditions.
Thank you for having us, Hilda. It's good to be here.
Thanks, Hilda.
So tell us about your most recent birth story. I understand there was a twist at the end.
There was a little bit of a twist, and one that you don't necessarily hear about nowadays. So we have 5 children, and the last 2 are twins, and we had them in the height of 2020. And it was a decision that we made to have them at home. And we went through the pregnancy. I didn't get any ultrasounds. I was being cared for by a midwife and just chose not to do. We only usually do the 20-week ultrasound because, we don't really know how those affect our babies. It's seen, I think, widespread as something that carries no risk, but that's not entirely true. So we try to limit those, usually only do the anatomy scan. But with COVID going on, I just did not want to deal with the hospital or any of that. And so I just chose to forego it this time. And towards the end of my pregnancy, everything was pretty much on par with my other pregnancies. But towards the end, I was just very uncomfortable. And it was kind of always a joke between Noah and I, like, what if we ever had twins? Like, what would that look like? And he's kind of always wanted twins. And I was always like, I could never do that. And so anyway, towards the end of the pregnancy, I was not necessarily a ton bigger, but I was just really uncomfortable and my hips hurt. And I told my midwife, like, there's not 2 in there. And she had checked for 2. She checked, the positioning and with the Doppler and never heard 2 heartbeats. And she was like, well, why don't you just for peace of mind, just go get an ultrasound, just so we know what we're expecting. And we went the day before I went into labor for just a last minute ultrasound. And she said, oh yeah, there's just 1 baby in there. We knew it was a boy. We did the blood test, just the simple blood test at 13 weeks. So we knew it was a boy. And she said, he's head down. And yeah, I just see 1 baby. And then the next day I went into labor and everything was pretty normal. I delivered our first boy and kept having contractions. And I thought, after birth, there's a little bit of an adrenaline rush and kind of like a high, that oxytocin high. You're not really aware as well as you would be in any other circumstances. So I don't think it registered to me, but I think my midwife kind of knew by the way I was contracting after I had already birthed the baby. And then 6 minutes later, I felt the urge to push and out came another baby boy. And so we had baby boy twins at home, and it's an amazing story. It really is. We're just really grateful.
Goodness, that is so crazy. Wow. And it's funny how this second baby boy was kind of hiding in there.
Yeah, that's the crazy thing is, we wanted to just double check that right before her due date. And we went into the ultrasound and we're like, but for sure there's not twins, right? Because that's basically the only reason we're here. And she's like, oh yeah, I've been doing this for, so many years and there's not twins. It's like, okay, why? So at that point we had just kind of, I think, slipped that from our mind as a possibility. And so when the second boy came out, we were just dumbfounded. Like, even though we were thinking about it all along, we had kind of just, ironically deferred to the experts in this case. And, it was just a surprise and a blessing. And we were especially thankful because I don't think if we would have known, we might have been forced to do something differently just because of twins and
they were breech
and, so it all worked out in the end. And we were thankful that we could finally have like a totally natural birth where we didn't have to kind of fight with the medical provider as far as like, getting to make our own choices.
Well, let's talk about that a little bit, Elizabeth. I know you're a registered nurse. Why didn't you opt for a hospital birth on this occasion?
So all of my previous births took place in a hospital. There's various reasons for that. And so I went through the system and I've experienced births in the hospital. And I knew this time around, I told Noah, I was like, I am not, this baby was kind of a surprise. And so when we found out we were expecting, I said, I am not birthing this baby in the hospital. I will have a home birth. I don't care what we have to do, insurance, or not, whether they cover it or we're not doing this in the hospital. And there's a lot of reasons for that. Noah kind of touched on it, but the main one being when you do things the way that we do and you want to do things naturally in the way that your body was designed to do it, you have to fight every step of the way for the birth that you want. And I just didn't want to have to do that again. I just wanted somebody that would come alongside of me and trust my body and the way that it was designed to birth. And I knew that the only way that I was going to get that was in the hospital, or was a home birth as opposed to a hospital.
So let's get specific. What are the things that the hospital wants done their way versus the things that you wanted to do a more natural or your way?
So that's really a great question. And, I'm a guy, so I've never obviously experienced birth, but I've seen it. And I've also been told plenty of stories from husbands of wives that have told their, wife's birth story. And I hear it all the time. It starts out, well, my wife really wanted to do more natural. And, I think most women, if I hazard a guess, want to do what they would say like a natural birth. And when we say natural, we mean, an unmedicated vaginal birth, the way that we believe was designed by God, because, there's a lot of reasons for that there's so many things going on in the woman's body, with the hormones leading up to birth. And hormones are chemical messengers. They have a purpose in our body, and they're expecting to go through that birth process, to have their fulfillment. And, there's a lot of crucial reasons why, natural birth is so much better for the woman, for the baby. The baby gets exposed to the woman's flora going through the birth canal that sets the baby up for, having way less risk factors as far as allergies and so on. And it expels a lot of the fluid from the lungs of the baby. But also, a woman is set up for having way less complications, with a natural birth, And so the stories that I commonly hear is like, well, my wife really wanted to do natural. And then, she went past her due date. So these due dates are just, one size fits all, of course. Mm-hmm. And so she went in for her scheduled Pitocin, induction, where they induce you. And these things are commonly at night because the doctors don't want to be up. They want to start you with the Pitocin at night. So by the morning, maybe you're progressing and you're, closer. And so then the woman's already somewhat tired from being up all night. And, if it isn't progressing the way that they want it to, or they expect it to, then it's just one thing leads to another. I like to kind of say they put you on the intervention train and it doesn't really stop. There's no stops for it because that's their ecosystem. It's a totally different ecosystem than the natural ecosystem, where it's like the stories go, they put them on Pitocin and it's not progressing quickly enough. So they have, one tool in the toolbox, they put them on more Pitocin, and then they have to break the water. And then even if the woman was wanting to, not do an epidural, those Pitocin contractions, with no amniotic sac are, from what I've been told, are extremely painful. And so, then they bring in the anesthesiologist and do the epidural. And then if the birth continues to stall out because the woman isn't getting to use those natural contractions, that she's in touch with her body, then ultimately it goes to C-section. And that's why we're seeing, some hospitals have C-section rates as high as 60% or more.
Even outside of the actual labor process, to answer your question more specifically, the things that I typically felt like I was having to fight with providers on is even choices leading up to birth. The period in which you're leading up to birth is just as important for preparation and all of that to have a successful birth as the actual birth process itself. So finding a provider that aligns with your values, there was times I felt like I was fighting every single step of the way from the moment I went for that first appointment. They don't necessarily say, hey, this is the plan. These are the risks that are associated with that. We're going to do these ultrasounds. Hey, you're getting your vaccine today. This is what we're doing here. They just kind of tell you, hey, this is what we're doing. They don't really necessarily, phrase it in a term where you have a choice. And so, I don't do any of that. I don't get my vaccination. I don't even know when. I think it's 28 weeks is when they offer it to pregnant women. I don't do a lot of the ultrasounds. I do an alternative to the glucose test. And that's something that women don't know that they have a choice for. They just get handed the glucose drink that's got, 50 grams of sugar and BVO and corn solids. They just take it because they just think that they don't have a choice. And that's not true. And even when I would express I want a different option for this because there are other options, I was met with resistance. And you just have to know your options. And the only way to come to that is through education. And so, the glucose test, you have a choice about that. You have a choice with the position that you give birth in. We put women on their backs to push. And that's not even physiologically the best way for women it's the worst way, actually. You don't have gravity to help you. And, these women, obviously, when you have an epidural, that's another thing because you're numb. And so you kind of have to be on your back, but you do have options. They don't have to break your water because that is when you have the amniotic sac intact, it's like a natural buffer for those contractions. And I've experienced with all of the births that I've had, I did get induced. I had Pitocin with my first child because she was almost 42 weeks. And the doctor was saying, fluid is decreasing, just kind of a little bit of like scare tactics. We don't want anything bad to happen. Yada, yada, yada. And so I did fall for that for my first baby and we got induced and I dealt with Pitocin contractions for 18 hours. And by the grace of God, I was still able to do it naturally, but it could have gone a lot worse. And so, you learn as you go. And so there's so many choices that women have. And I just want them to know that if you're educated and you know what choices you have, it's a lot easier to stand up for yourself and for your baby. Even if you're having a birth in a hospital, it's 100% doable.
Yeah, my husband and I did the Bradley method of birthing. And so we got educated about what our rights were. Otherwise, I would have had no idea. Even the minute you walk into the hospital, at least when I did it, they were like, okay, we need to give you an IV. And I was like, no, I don't want an IV. I will stay hydrated with ice chips or what have you, because I knew, like you were saying, Noah, it could be a cascade of interventions. First, you get the IV. Then they'll put something in there to speed up the labor or whatever. For them, it's convenient, but it's not something I wanted. I didn't want something in my arm with some fluid dripping in when I could perfectly well take it in through my mouth. So, Elizabeth, I want to go back to, you mentioned vaccine. What vaccine do they offer pregnant women at 20 weeks or so?
It's the Tdap vaccine. So it's supposed to protect women from like pertussis, and the idea is to get those antibodies, going with the vaccine so that your baby is also protected. And like I said, it's really not given as a choice to women. It's just kind of like, this is what we're doing. And, these are just the things that we do. And they don't really necessarily do informed consent for that.
But since you're a nurse, tell us what you know about the vaccine schedule for pregnant women or for babies. What did you learn about that as a pediatric nurse?
Well, in school, we were taught very minimal, basically just like the schedule, what the specific vaccines were for, maybe like when and where those are typically given, and then maybe some basic adverse reactions that can come from that. And then over the course of my hospital career, there's things anecdotally that you see just working in a hospital as a pediatric nurse. You would see kids come in that, to me, once my eyes were opened, it was so clear. And that kind of muddy water was cleared out. And I could see like, wow, this could potentially be a vaccine reaction, but it's not recognized. Kiddos having seizures, 12 hours after a vaccine. And you're like, you try and bring that up to the doctor and it's just dismissed. There's no correlation at all. And that's really hard. That's really hard to be in a system where you don't feel like you're listened to when it comes to, vaccines are just like on this pedestal and they can do no wrong. And I saw it differently. And I think once you do your research and you do know everything that there is to know in the history and it's just so clear to you, and you just want everybody else to have that clarity as well.
What was the turning point for you? You said you had like a moment when your eyes were opened.
I think having a kid, I think getting pregnant, you're not only taking care of yourself anymore, but you're caring for another life that you've been entrusted to. And so we should do our due diligence as mothers. You know, we research car seats, and we research how to feed our babies, and we research the best cribs and all of this stuff. Why are we not researching vaccinations? Why are we not taking the time to educate ourselves with something that's injected into our little baby's body from literally hours old? They're injecting our babies, you know, Hep B and vitamin K are things that are given on the first day of life, typically. It just doesn't make sense to me why you would just trust the experts when it comes to that. Why would you not want to make sure with something so massively important?
Noah, were you in favor of vaccination for your children? Did you also have some kind of eye-opening moment before your first baby was born?
I never really was. I mean, I was vaccinated as a child, but it started out for me as something that I didn't trust because I hadn't studied it. And I knew the risk of potential side effects. And so I actually took a vaccine right before the birth of our firstborn. And that actually made me really sick. It's the sickest I've been probably in my life that I can remember. I was already, dealing with autoimmune disease, and I think that just totally pushed me over. So that might have helped in me to starting to put two and two together. And then once I went down the rabbit trail and started, researching a lot of, the vaccine history, as Elizabeth was saying, with, how many of these diseases were eradicated before they even introduced the vaccine. And since then, I've gone further down the rabbit trail, with the likes of even Dr. Tom Cowan, Sally Fallon Morell. They've written a book called Contagion Myth. And at this point, I don't see any purpose in getting a vaccine if, viruses have never been proven to be isolated. They've never been proven to exist. So I'm in that camp now. I mean, that might be one thing where we slightly differ, Elizabeth and I, but it doesn't really change the reality that vaccines have a history of causing negative side effects. And we are seeing that, now today, especially with, the current environment that we're in. I mean, it's very telling when we had a higher overall mortality rate in 2021 than we did in 2020.
After vaccines, quote unquote, were brought into the picture for COVID. Wow. Yeah. Like you said, once your eyes are opened, it's hard not to see it.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe the same is true with how we see pregnancy. In other words, maybe this is an issue that the medical system sees pregnancy as, I don't want to say a sickness, but, a condition that needs to be treated as opposed to something natural that's going to bring about a new life into the world. What do you think, Elizabeth?
Oh, 100%. That's something that I stand beside, that pregnancy, it's not a disease or, like you said, a condition that needs intervened upon in most cases. I think that women are, for the most part, led to believe a lie that, a woman's body doesn't know what it's doing and that this isn't like a completely natural thing. It's profitable to operate from that kind of mindset of fear. And when you can make somebody fearful of something, which I think a lot of women are fearful of birth, you can kind of convince them to do a lot of things. But when you remove that fear, it allows for so many more possibilities. And so I think that you just have to have a mindset shift.
Coming up, Noah and Elizabeth compare the differences in care between a hospital setting and one at home. They also recommend specific resources to explore the possibilities for a more comfortable, healthy, natural prenatal and birth experience.
You're listening to the Wise Traditions podcast from the Weston A. Price Foundation. We pause now to recognize our sponsors.
Paleo Valley. Paleo Valley offers more than beef sticks. I used to only buy beef sticks from them, and now I know they have so many products, including an amazing apple cider vinegar complex that gets all of the healing properties of apple cider vinegar into daily diet without the fuss or the burn. You probably know by now that apple cider vinegar has been shown to support digestion, breaking down proteins for better absorption of nutrients, improving the blood sugar response, and more. Well, Paleo Valley combines apple cider vinegar with other healing spices, turmeric, ginger, cinnamon, and lemon to be specific, for added benefits for digestion. There are all kinds of studies that show the benefits of adding this to the diet. It can lower glucose and insulin responses and increase satiety, help with weight loss, even heartburn. You can take this apple cider vinegar complex whenever you like. Some people like to take it while they're fasting to help with digestion, after a big meal, to aid with weight loss, and more. I take it now and then to kind of spice up my morning routine, and I'm thrilled about it. Check it out at paleovalley.com and use the code word WISE for 15% off at checkout. That's paleovalley.com and the code WISE. And Optimal Carnivore. Organ meats are some of the most nutrient-dense foods on the planet. The founders of Optimal Carnivore understood the amazing benefits of eating organ meats, but they found it difficult to source a variety of high-quality organ meat. Plus, they disliked the process of preparing them and trying to make them tasty. So, they started sourcing 100% grass-fed organ meats from New Zealand, freeze-drying the organs and encapsulating them into convenient bovine gelatin capsules. They chose New Zealand because it is a pure source, and they freeze-dry the organs to preserve all of the vitamins, minerals, proteins, and enzymes. And, knowing that our ancestors would have eaten the whole animal, they created a unique blend of 9 different organs in their grass-fed organ complex. It's a powerful combination, including beef liver, brain, thymus, heart, kidney, spleen, pancreas, lung, and gallbladder. It's a real nose-to-tail solution. Each organ contains its own unique benefits and nutritional profile and provides a large range of nutrients that support all of the major organs and glands. Optimal Carnivore believes that everyone deserves easy access to the most nutrient-dense foods on the planet, and they want to take the guesswork and hassle out of eating organ meat. And you can rest easy knowing that Optimal Carnivore's products are 100% grass-fed and grass-finished, free of hormones, pesticides, antibiotics, and GMOs. They cover your bases at home or while traveling. Plus, Optimal Carnivore plants 1 tree for every product sold, which helps the environment. So go to amazon.com/optimalcarnivore and order the grass-fed organ complex, the grass-fed bone marrow, or their grass-fed liver products, or all 3. And use the code WESTON10 to save 10% at checkout. That's amazon.com/optimalcarnivore and the code WESTON10 to save 10%. This is Holistic Hilda, and you're listening to Wise Traditions. Talk to us about those possibilities. Again, I want to have you contrast one of the hospital births you had and the one you recently had at home with the twins.
Yeah, for sure. So it's night and day. There is no comparison. With my hospital births, you go to these appointments every 4 weeks in the beginning. It's like you're being put through just kind of like the system they have. You go in, you get your weight, you pee in a cup, you see the doctor for, maybe 5-10 minutes. You waited probably 20, sometimes more to see them. You see them for 5-10 minutes. They, ask you the same questions every time, and then you're on your way. And you do that for 9 months. And every single time you go, you're having to fight all of these things, like I said. And you can maybe find a provider who is a little bit more aligned with your values, but I didn't really experience that with my hospital births. Even people who claim to be more natural were still very pro all of these interventions. And in contrast to that, with going with a home birth, my midwife, and I had hospital midwives at one point too with other pregnancies. So with my home birth, she came to my home. Our visits were an hour at least. If I had more questions or needed to talk, more about things, then she was available to do that. I still got all of, the safety things. Like she would still test my urine and my blood pressure and take all of my vitals. But she would also ask me things that you're not going to get asked with traditional OBs or traditional midwives. How is your diet? What does your diet look like? Do this nutrition log for me for a week so I can see maybe, where we can improve. How are you sleeping? Are you getting any exercise? These things that maybe the modern Western model don't really see as valuable. So that was just so different. And then, nearing the actual birth, there was just space. I can't really describe it any way other than she just gave me space. You know, when I knew I was in labor, she just kind of let me do my thing. And like I said, there was just like this trust in my body, and she would check in every now and then, like, hey, you know, how are you doing? Like, here, eat this peanut butter toast. You haven't really eaten anything in a while. Whereas in the hospital, you know, it's just constant. There's a revolving door. We have to get this IV in. You need fluids. Don't eat anything. Even though you're about to run this marathon, do not eat anything just in case, you know, we have to take you into a C-section and you were to aspirate. It's absolutely insane that women are told that they can't eat anything when they're doing these labors. And so there was just a trust in my body. There was a trust in the process and an understanding and a calmness. There was just so much more peace in my home birth. And in the hospital, there's just a lot of busyness and a lot of unnecessary monitoring, you know, those fetal monitors that they'll put on your belly. Even if you're doing a natural birth, you have to come back and get strapped to the bed to monitor that. And I understand why, you know, I'm speaking as a nurse, and I don't want to be misunderstood. I don't think that nurses are inherently like doing this evil, you know, like I understand why they're doing it. They have to protect themselves. They have to make sure that the baby is okay. But I think that the thing that a lot of people don't understand is that the interventions, he calls it the intervention train. I call it the cascade of interventions. You're on that time clock the moment you step into the hospital. You're on their time clock. And if you aren't following that time clock, then they're going to take it up to the next intervention. And it's kind of hard to stop that snowball once it starts. And so I think what a lot of people don't understand is that the things that happen in the hospital are often a result of all of these interventions that they're doing.
Do you want to add anything to that, Noah?
Well, I think the environment is so crucial. I mean, for one, is one that actually believes in the human body, you know, that the body is self-regulating and self-healing, and that, you know, we're fearfully and wonderfully made. And the other one sees pregnancy as, I wouldn't say an inconvenience, but it's similar to the allopathic world and how they treat, you know, symptoms versus a root cause approach of, you know, more of a naturopathic mindset, you know, believing in the body. But just that fear and that stress environment is something that we really didn't like from day one, from the very first time we ever went to a hospital, where we're like, well, why can't we take off this fetal monitor? I mean, she just wants to get up and walk around. And so in that environment where it's a fear environment where, you know, they hold all the cards, and if you don't respect and, you know, do what they say, then they try and scare you into compliance. It's almost like, you know, gaslighting. I don't think that they're intentionally trying to do that. They really believe that the best thing for you is to just go through their process, because I feel like when you say, oh, I want to do it natural, they kind of smile at you, you know, like they know better. Like, yeah, that's cute. You know, we know what's going to happen. You know, we're the experts. And you can't even really ask why, you know, respectfully. It's almost like this, you know, moral superiority of even asking why. And that's so unscientific. I mean, the scientific method is based off of why. You know, I'm a scientist, I'm an engineer. I think, you know, why is a great question. And if why is not honored, then how do you build a level of trust and respect? I mean, I would say the why in the medical system, like Elizabeth said, it has a lot to do with money. C-sections are several times more profitable than a natural birth. And if you're 100% natural, then people might think, well, why do I need a doctor? Not that in some cases interventions aren't absolutely necessary. You know, we're not saying that. We believe in, you know, the modern advancements of the medical system. You know, if I have a gunshot wound or I'm in a car wreck, absolutely, I want to go to the hospital. Mm-hmm. But for many things, our bodies are so much more complex, and we're equipped to deal with these things. And we have, I mean, it's shown to have much better outcomes, way lower risk of complications for doing it naturally.
Yeah, there's actually statistics. Low risk women who have planned home births, it's just as safe, if not safer, than the hospital. And I think that was something that we really had to come to an understanding about, because even with our mindset, there's still a little bit of fear there, like with the what ifs. But when you look at the data and you look at the outcomes of home births and the C-section rate versus the C-section rate in the hospital, Noah said some hospitals are over 60% C-section rate. I think the average in the US is in the 30s right now, whereas for home birth, it's around 5% rate of C-section. That's not a coincidence.
Super interesting. And I was wondering if you could offer any resources to the listeners, because you said one of the most important things is to educate yourself about what you can do and what you can take hold of wherever you decide to give birth in the end. What resources would you recommend for folks to look into this sort of thing?
I think there's good books out there. I really resonate with Ina May Gaskin and her Natural Guide to Childbirth. She's very empowering to women. We come from more of a biblical perspective. And so I really enjoyed Redeeming Childbirth. That was a book that really speaks away the fear of birth and shows how birth is not a curse. And, we can do this, we can honor our bodies, and we can trust the process that God has designed. And then I think it's also important to educate yourself through a quality birth course, especially if you're a first-time mom. I think that there is value in that. With our first child, we did the hospital natural, I'm doing quotations, natural birth course. It was awful. We didn't learn anything. And now there's so many good resources, so many good birth courses online even that are offered. I can give you some names of those if you wanted to put them in the show notes or something so people can maybe look into them. But I think being educated about what is going to happen and knowing why your body, not just only what is going to happen during your birth and pre-birth, but why it's happening. I think when you can understand the why behind things, it really does take away a lot of the fear. And so there's some really great courses out there.
Just go ahead and mention them, Elizabeth, because I know folks are going to want to know.
Okay. Yeah, sure. So Happy Home Birth Academy is one. And another one is Pain-Free Birth. And I know that Mama Natural also has a birth course. I haven't personally been through that one, but those would be the top three that I recommend to check out.
And did you want to add something, Noah?
For husbands, one thing that we can do is to encourage and remind our wives to breathe. Because I was thinking about some of the classes that we did do at the hospital. Like Elizabeth said, for the most part, they were not very helpful because they didn't really talk about natural birth. They didn't really talk about positions and changing and moving around and using contractions. But they did talk a little bit about breath. And I think that is something that husbands can remind, their wives to be breathing. And I even think there's some practical breath work is very useful in a lot of areas of life. We can control our minds. We can slow down, our stress by just our breathing, going back into the parasympathetic state. And so, even doing things like, weight training or like a Baptiste yoga where you're learning to breathe with exercise, with muscle contractions, I think can be very helpful because the baby gets the oxygen the same way that the mother does. She has to breathe in. And so it's crucial to be getting those breaths, even through the difficult times of pushing. That's something that husbands can do. In addition to, just being a support, being an encouragement, is to remember the breath. The breath is key. The breath is crucial.
Well, Noah, it's really been fun to have you be a part of this conversation because usually we just talk to the moms, but the dads need to be involved too.
I think that's something that is absolutely necessary. When you're pregnant and you are looking at, okay, what do I want my birth to look like? I think there's some really important things that you have to keep in mind. Having a supportive spouse is top one of those priorities. And, take ownership of your birth and your birth experience and what you want that to look like. Know your non-negotiables, know what's important to you, and also be educated about those. Know why you're choosing to go that path, because if you're going to be birthing in a hospital, you are going to face some resistance. And so just having that knowledge helps you to be confident in your decision. But having a supportive spouse and also provider, like that's another really important thing, is to find a provider. You can interview doctors, you can interview midwives, and there's things that you can ask to see if you guys are on the same page and see if you resonate with that provider. And I've seen women switch providers at 38 weeks and change to a home birth because they didn't feel like they were being supported. And it's so important to have a supportive provider and a supportive spouse, because your spouse is the one that's there through it all. You know, Noah, he was my rock during all of our labors.
Well, this has been great. Thank you both for bringing your information and your hearts to this conversation. I want to wrap up with a question I often pose at the end. If the listener could just do one thing to improve their health, maybe related to pregnancy and childbirth, it may not, but what would you recommend that they do? Noah, let's start with you.
I would just say, trust your body, educate yourself. Fear is an obstacle that can be overcome by education through wisdom and having love in a situation. And so don't treat any one problem as an isolated thing. Seek an overall, wellness through diet, through lifestyle, through your environment, living with less toxins in your environment. The things that the Weston A. Price Foundation, talks about, these things are all important to, living your best life.
That's great. And Elizabeth, what about you?
Just kind of piggybacking off of that. Yeah, just focus on the whole health of the body, especially in terms of pregnancy. We've been talking about birth a lot. The whole health of the pregnant mom. There's physical prep involved, staying active and eating well, whole foods, getting rest, getting sun. These things that are not often focused on, I think, can really improve your health, especially through pregnancy.
Oh, such a good point. Trust your body and keep it well so that you can nourish that little one too. Thank you both again. This has been a great conversation. I appreciate you.
Thank you, Hilda.
Our guests today were Elizabeth and Noah Parsons. Visit their website for resources on a number of holistic parenting topics. Go to purelyparsons.com. And I'm Hilda Labrada-Gore, the host and producer of this podcast for the Weston A. Price Foundation. You can find me at holistichilda.com. And for the transcript for this week's episode, visit our website, westonaprice.org, and click on the podcast page. And now for a recent review from Apple Podcasts. Ivy Kimberly says, so much value. This podcast has given me support and information on what I inherently know. It's affirming to listen along and have both my mind and my body screaming, yes! I learn something in every episode, even if it's not a topic that I feel is relevant to my life on that day. Thank you all so very much. Ivy Kimberly, you are welcome. Thank you for your review. Every single review that's posted makes this podcast more appealing to someone who hasn't listened yet. So thank you. And I want to invite you to stay well, my friend. Thank you for listening. All shall be well, and all shall be well, and all manner of things shall be well.
On behalf of the Weston A. Price Foundation, thanks for listening. We have many free resources to support you on your health journey. Visit westonaprice.org to find podcasts, articles, videos, and more. You can also find a local chapter near you for help in finding sources of great food. We invite you to support the Foundation's mission of education, research, and activism by becoming a member. Thanks again, and take care. Wise Traditions is a project of the Weston A. Price Foundation for wise traditions in food, farming, and the healing arts. The content on this podcast is provided for informational purposes only and is not intended to substitute for the advice provided by your doctor or other healthcare professional. It is not intended to be, nor does it constitute healthcare or medical advice.